Welcome to another episode of Off the Record. And I'm Councilman Curtis Jones Jr., also known as Mr. 4th District, aka Run Kurt Run. And in these episodes, we talk about nothing, but we also wind up talking about just about everything. And I'm honored to have today two of my colleagues, my members in council, Maria Quinones Sanchez of the 7th District and Jamie Gauthier of the 3rd District. And Jamie, if I look out the window, I can look right across the street into the 3rd District. So we are literally neighbors. So welcome to Off the Record.
Thank you.
So let me tell y'all a little bit about these two. If I were going into a bar fight, I would not take some of my male colleagues in council. I would take pound for pound either one of these two and know that they would have my back and know that they would represent themselves well. And I say that my first meeting with Maria it was at the insistence of a mutual mentor, Tommy Massaro. For those of you who may not know him, spent a lot of time teaching Government 101 to a lot of new members. And he said, I want you to go and meet your classmate, Maria Quinones Sanchez. And so I go up into the middle of the 7th District to her announcement. And what was interesting was it was regular people from the neighborhood. They did not have a big podium. They did not have this super sound system. And I saw this short in height, tall in stature individual for the first time. So things weren't going well, as things often do. You can plan all you want. Things are going to happen. She grabbed a little chair, jumped up on the chair, grabbed the microphone, and gave one of the best announcement speeches I ever heard. And I said to myself, we can be friends. So that's how I met Maria. For Jamie, I was taken away because she has this nice, genteel veneer, but under it, she from the hood. She really is. But she kills you with not cursing, but her vocabulary is so extensive. All you had to do was look at Inside Story this Sunday. If you missed it, you should Google it. And she really has a way of getting to the point and making her point. And for a freshman, she's anything but new. She's cut right to some of the most progressive legislation I've seen since me and Maria came on board. So with that, welcome to our show. Thank you again for putting up with some of our technical difficulties on Off the Record. How you doing?
Thank you, Tag. You're my brother from another mother.
You know that. She gave me that name when we traveled to the island of Puerto Rico, and she gave me the name Che. And I went to different parts of the island using my native name. So, and one of the things that Jamie and I share is Market Street. And it is a challenging part of our district. I was looking at crime stats recently. We're doing crime mapping, which I will share with you, Jamie. And literally, if you look out the window to my office over to your district, it has some of the highest numbers in both of our respective districts right within this 4-block area. And I'm going to share that.
Yeah, I realize that. Yeah.
Right. So let's get started. I'm going to throw this out there and we could take it anywhere you want. As we come back to dealing with a pandemic, dealing with social uprising, both of you had it bad on Kensington, and you had it bad at 52nd and Chestnut. I had it bad at 52nd and Jefferson. and throughout my district, what will be our city's new normal? Predict it for me what you see in total context of coming out of a pandemic and dealing with some of the challenges budgetarily we're going to have. What will be our new normal? And I'm going to start with our senior member, Maria.
Well, hopefully it will not be our old normal, because if we learned anything from the social unrest and COVID, is that we should no longer tolerate the disparities that exist in our communities, right? And for those of us who represent historically marginalized communities, often talk about some of these disparities, but COVID showed us that unless we act in a very focused, intentional way, people will lose their lives. And so, what you've seen on Kensington with some of the loss related to opioids, the drug dealing, and now the gun violence that comes along with it, to what we have experienced with COVID, we are entrusted to represent people, and there needs to be more of a renewed sense of urgency. So, to me, is now getting more comfortable about making people uncomfortable, because
Ooh,
I think
say that
we've lost
again.
in
I'm going to
government.
hashtag that.
Yeah, we there's a sense of urgency, and this is a debate I have. I'm a mother of a millennial mother and Z. And one of the things I hear from my kids all the time is, or my young men, is that government has lost a sense of urgency, and I think we have. And I think this is the time where we can be unapologetic about calling people out. We can be unapologetic about the fact that those of us who believe in some form of reparations and really leveling out the playing field, that we're going to have to be more disruptors in this work.
So I'm going to switch over to my colleague, Ms. Goodyear, but we used to be the liberal element of council. You remember that? These freshmen came in and ripped that label right off the package and, to their credit, challenged the status quo to introduce and pass some of the most progressive legislation I've seen in a while. So talk to me about the new normal, Jamie.
Yeah. I agree with Councilmember Quinones Sanchez, that things have to shift, and they have to shift in a way that they take care of everyday people. I think one of the things that has been most apparent for me through this whole pandemic and through this whole ordeal, is all of the disparities that existed before COVID have gotten worse. So the people that we represent in our district, Black and brown working folks, folks who are in poverty, they got the most sick from this virus. They were the ones who had to still go out to work, and put themselves at risk. They were the ones who lost their jobs first. They were the ones who were at risk for losing their housing. And so I think that our new normal has to be a society where, when a crisis happens, the bottom just doesn't fall out. There's just so many people. We have to rebuild in a way that supports everyday working people, even when there's a crisis. And some of the unrest that we saw on 52nd Street and in Kensington, and the continued unrest and the violence that we're seeing in our communities, I think people have had it.
So one of the things that we did together, and I say that because I've always looked to Maria for being not just doing good, but knowing how much good cost, where you were able to marry something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, to create the progressive legislation, everything from eviction moratoriums to technical assistance provided for renters, to a series of progressive pieces of legislation that we were able to find compromise on that. How difficult was that, Maria?
Well, I think part of the challenge is that we have not had strong leadership to guide us through this turbulent time, right? And I think we do time and time again is, one, to provide some leadership around some of these issues, but ultimately we have to get the executive to make that investment. And I think one of the things that I hope comes out of the new normal is that if the budget and our budget is going to be a moral document, it should better reflect the needs. And what we saw was that missing, and council really coming forward. Obviously, in my role as chair of appropriations, I want to support my colleagues on that, and I understand that ultimately money is needed for that, for good legislation to have more impact on what we're trying to do. Because what we saw with COVID is whether it was people losing their houses, to people losing their jobs, we have to get money and resources into people's hands. And what we have systematically had is a government that designs programs for poor people in a way that is hostile, and that it just assumes that people do not warrant the support. So we organize and we plan programs for the 1% that might take advantage of it, and then we disenfranchise the 99% of people who have very tough situations, who need the help. And I think COVID has showed us that we can shift that and get resources into people's hands so that they make better decisions than any government official can for their families.
So, Jamie, I don't know if you took the time to notice, but a lot of times Philadelphia used to imitate other best practices in other cities. In the legislation that was proposed by this council, a lot of municipalities, including the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, imitated
Mhm.
what we did here in Philadelphia. Do you realize that?
I do. I realize that we were the first city to put forward as progressive rental support and protection policies during COVID, and that a lot of people, a lot of other localities followed after that. So that was a hard process, and it took a lot of conversations and compromise and coalition building. But in the end, I'm really proud of what we did as a council and what I got to be a part of. And I think we helped a lot of people.
So I want to thank Maria because what we tend to do in council is we represent our constituencies and then bend that to address the greater good of the city. So our districts come first, but the well being of the city must be taken into account as opposed to our individual districts. So we did that. And I was proud of how not just the sausage, but how the sausage was made. And I had a front row seat to see the back and forth, and the public and the media do not see how you had to have patience to deal with amendments, compromises, and things that people don't see in order to get 9 votes to get laws passed. And that is a maturity that doesn't always, like when we were freshmen, we didn't want to hear that. You know what I mean? But thank you,
Our
Maria.
first bill was a drop bill. Remember, our first bill was a drop bill, and our colleagues slapped us down.
Oh we were progressive in that sense. And like I could name a couple of council people that got me in the hallway and threatened me short of my life. Said, you vote for that, I'm gonna see you in the parking lot. So you didn't get
They
those
can't
kinds of.
corner us in the hallway now.
Yeah, they yeah, you know how it goes. So let me ask you a question. Predict where we are on this year's budget discussions and possible budget deficit. Where do you see us at, Maria, Chair of Appropriations?
We're actually going to get a lot of federal assistance. So my concern is not the budget, but that we don't spend it the way we spent it in the past. So the new normal has to be more equitable. And I am very concerned that the administration will want and come to us and say that the post-COVID Philadelphia should operate like the pre-COVID Philadelphia. So that is very concerning. One of the things, again, related to some of this housing relief, what we saw was that when we get money in people's hands, people make good decisions around it. Is we're going to get millions of dollars, and we can't put it into inefficient, ineffective models. And so use the new money that's going to come in from the federal government to provide for innovation, more effectiveness, and more accountability. I don't see a deficit, but I do see the challenge of, will we think out of the box? Will we be more equitable and intentional in how we invest in people, not structures?
Jamie, what's your thoughts?
I am very hopeful that we're going to get a significant amount of federal support, and I agree. We have to make sure that we're taking care of working class folks in our communities. First and foremost, we have to do something about gun violence. If we can't keep people alive, then nothing else matters. And so I would like to see us invest more in prevention and intervention that can help young people in our community to make different choices and connect them to different opportunities, because that will tamp down the violence. Additionally, I think we have to invest in housing. We have to help our small businesses on our neighborhood corridors. We have to get our schools in a better condition. And we have to help everyday people rebuild, because I think that's the key to us being a more equitable and a stronger city.
So, what I'm hearing, and I've gotten briefings from Congressman Evans at the federal level and Senator Hughes at the state level, is that they're looking at the way Democrats and Republicans have structured. So, in Harrisburg, there is a monopoly on the Senate being on the Republican side of things. And we've been suggested that we go after appropriations that literally bypass the state, go directly to the city in order for us to be able to provide that direct relief without all of those strings attached and compromises that would have to be made during the state process. What's your thoughts on that, real quick?
Well, I have some of my colleagues at the state level that will tell you, if you want to pass $1 billion bill, you need to save up for $3 billion, because you got to buy off all the votes related to getting to that compromise. So I agree with you. We saw the state use CARES money to cover a budget hole while we were here waiting for a rental release and support. So I agree we need to do that. But again, we also locally have to be responsible for how we utilize this money and use innovation around that. And we have been unwilling to look at other models. COVID allowed us to think outside the box, and we should use that as a template for how we do that moving in the future. Pre-COVID, we were very excited about our poverty fund discussion and our action plan. We had a pivot. I think you're going to see in the next few weeks a restart of that, because ultimately we're leaving $450 million of federal money on the table. What we learned with the first CARES Act, that 67,000 people didn't get the first $1,200. There's about 100,000 people that didn't get the second 600, and then we're going to get into a third release stimulus package. So there are millions of dollars on the table for struggling families, and we got to help those families access those resources, because that's going to change. Going back to the council member Gautier's point, we got to help working class people, and we just assume they're sitting around waiting for us to tell them this information. They're making tough choices, juggling virtual learning, juggling their essential jobs, and so we got to get that money, because getting $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 into one family's household will change, right?
Game
The
changer.
level of stability and concern that they're currently facing with the COVID pandemic.
So I hope everybody heard what Maria said about the last stimulus COVID package that went to Harrisburg, where the administration decided that they would take a significant portion of that money to deal with their own budget deficit. So let me segue a little bit and deal with an issue that impacts the 7th and the 3rd and the 4th districts: gun violence. 2021 is on pace to be 45%. I heard this statistic in Inside Story yesterday. A worse year than 2020 was. Touch on that for a minute, Jamie.
Yeah, we're on track for another really bad year. And it's disproportionately impacting all of our districts. And we're seeing a lot of young people die every day, a lot of young Black and Brown people. And it's my feeling that this needs to be at the top of our city's priority list. And I'm not feeling that it's there yet, right? I know that COVID is huge and has been, really bad for this city and cities across the country. But with the level of violence that we're seeing, gun violence needs to be at the same level. And so I'd love to see our city take a much more urgent, all hands on deck approach to addressing this issue. I have looked at that as a citywide emergency because to me, that would, declaring an emergency would provide a platform for us to address the issue in a better way. I think community members need to know and need to know our city is handling this problem. I think we need to be engaging all of our city agencies in the private sector, the world class healthcare institutions that we have here. We need to throw as many resources have at saving these young people. And I really don't think we're there yet.
You quoted yesterday that what you wanted to see was the same level of commitment to dealing with COVID as we deal with those resources appropriated to end gun violence, which I thought was powerful. Maria, so what's going on in your district when it comes to gun violence?
So, I think what the council members is saying, and the reason why the all hands on deck kind of strategy has to take place is we often forget we have $100 million in prevention dollars that the city utilizes through Department of Health and Human Services. And the fact of the matter is, when you look at the young people who have been victims of crimes, those young people have been in one part of our system or their families. And so what you're seeing is, without bringing all of the resources and the knowledge to bear in one central place, we know potentially who's going to be the next victim. And the question for us is, how are we not connecting those dots, right? And we have to move away from a government that checks off those boxes. And so for me, that call becomes hugely important and necessary, because without us figuring out how we support families and families who potentially can be in harm's way, so that we don't get to those victims and that trauma that we're experiencing through gun violence, is by holding all of those departments accountable for the types of resources and supports that they're giving their family. Disconnecting gun violence from Department of Behavioral Health, from Department of Human Services, from the Department of Housing, all of those families who are victims or touched are in one of those systems. And so we got to get aggressive around that. And it only happens when those departments understand that they are part of the solution and can't operate in a silo.
So we're doing a
I'll
study.
also say,
Go ahead.
I wanted to add that I think this should be a big topic of discussion during this budget session. The resources that we're putting towards this issue, not just towards policing, because we know the policing part, but I think that we need to be putting resources into more comprehensive prevention and intervention programs that can really kind of get down in these neighborhoods and help these young people.
So help us to understand, and it was a radical concept when my freshman members brought it up. What does defunding the police really mean to you? And I'm going to ask Maria to follow up on that.
It
Jenny?
means taking some of the substantial resources that we provide to police. At this point, our police budget is near $750 million, right? Taking some, and it's also, I believe, the biggest expenditure in our city's budget. So it means taking some of those resources and investing them in the myriad of other things that people need to be safe. That could be mental health support. That has played out in a big way in our city with Walter Wallace Jr., for example. That could be jobs and workforce development. That can be housing. People need more than just policing to be safe and to thrive. And that's what this term and this movement has been about. I'll also say that we've defunded lots of things in our history, and we don't seem to have had a problem with that. We defunded schools, for example. We've defunded all sorts of community services, but people are not as outraged about that discussion as they are around the police discussion.
So whenever you look at a budget document, you see a negative or a positive in parens. That means if it's been reduced or increased. So we defund, refund, increase funding on things all the time. And once you look at it in that perspective, it becomes less scary. Maria,
And
what do
we
you
and
think?
we and we mismanaged, right? One of the things in the last appropriations discussion around overtime, because Councilmember Gautier is right, when you put police, fire, and prisons together, that's almost 30% of our annual operating budget. When I ask those commissioners, go look at the top 200 people in your department who are doubling up their salary and overtime, and relate that back to performance and need. And if you can't do that, you're not managing your budget, right? And so I think there's a question around this. And you as chair of public safety, this is a space where I've always said both you and Councilman Johnson have done a lot of work. If we don't restructure $100 million in that police department, right, then we're not doing our jobs because we're not holding them accountable. Commissioners can't keep coming back with the same product line, and then every time we ask them to do something different, right, improve your homicide rate from 8% clearance to 30% clearance. If all those homicide detectives are making triple their salary and they have an 8% clearance rate, there's a problem.
So we need to talk
Manage
about
structure.
that for a second. If the guys in the barbershop knew that out of 100 times of shooting somebody, that only 8% of the time you are identified, caught, and convicted, that's the kind of thing we need to solve, or we need to do something different, because it is a damnable thing. And it's not all the police fault. We got to deal with the no snitching culture. Witnesses have to feel comfortable coming forward and feel protected when they do. But you can't keep a system that has a 92% failure ratio. What business would be open if 92% of the time my donuts don't make it to the table?
But you don't think the
And
guys
so
in the barbershop know? They might not have the stat, but they know that folks are not going away for these crimes.
I
I don't
agree.
think that that's
and
local.
I
yeah,
don't.
and
Go ahead.
And the problem is not only do we know who the perpetrators are, I go back to, we know who the perpetrators are and we know who the potential victims are because the history, they're in our systems already. And that's part of the problem. So that makes that statistic even worse because we know who's likely to become a victim. And we know that most of the crime are done by the same percentage of people, right? But we spend all this energy on everybody else. Like, we're hard on crime, on all the stuff that's petty. And then the folks that we know that we should be zeroing in on are get away with it. And so that's a problem. It's a mind shift around these structures that are in place. The current debate around DNA, right? The Larry Krasner has been talking about this DNA thing and this resistance to DNA to help us solve these cases because it's going to cost us $5 to $7 million. It should not be acceptable for a head of a department that has a budget of $750 million to tell city council that they can't prioritize 5 or 7. That's just, and this notion that we have to put more money on the table in order
Agreed.
for your 8% rate to get to 10. So I think we got to push back on this stuff. Then you're not managing your budget.
If it ain't
Agreed.
measured, It ain't managed.
That,
So
Can I also give you a really easy comparison that I make for people around this defunding the police issue?
please.
I consider it as communities where white people live. Communities where white people live, like in the suburbs, for example. In addition to having police, they have good housing, they have high quality schools, they have extracurricular activities for their young people. They invest heavily into a variety of things that help people to thrive and be safe. This is only this concept where our highest expenditure in a majority person of color city should be police is flawed, in my opinion. We need to do more investment on the front end and more investment in our neighborhoods to help people really lead good quality of life.
So to
But
your
we
point,
also, as a council, we have to change the terminology. We let mayors come and tell us when we ask for investment in people that it's an expense. We have to change. We're asking people to make this investment and stop spending money on systems that don't work. And I think we got to push back harder on that line.
so one of the things as a Pennsylvania Human Relations Commissioner, we did an analysis, and to Jamie's point, that your zip code can determine, and where you live can determine all kinds of outcomes for you, how long you live, how well and healthy you live, how your children are educated, and the probability of them being incarcerated, all in these investments or lack thereof in how we do things. Lower Marion is maybe 5 blocks from Philadelphia and my district, but it's two different worlds, two different youth outcomes, and we have to analyze that to see how we can do better. All right, I'm going to segue, and I'm going to ask you, and you listen to the question. Take yourself out of it, because I already know the answer to the question, or at least one of you. But you can't do that now because that would be tantamount to announcing. Who are some of the people that you're hearing that will be the next candidates for mayor of the city of Philadelphia? Dun, dun, dun. I'm gonna let Jamie go first and let Maria figure her way around this.
Okay, and half of council is not an appropriate answer.
No, you can but you can say, go ahead, get it.
Well, obviously, the wonderful, powerful woman who's on this podcast is someone who's been talked about, I think, for the last several years. And several other women. You want me to name names?
I want you to name
Okay,
names.
fine.
Talk
All right,
about it.
so
This is off the record. Ain't nobody listening.
Helen Gim, Councilmember Parker, Councilmember Bass, Councilmember Green, Councilmember Dom. I think I may have gotten them all. I think I got all the council people. I will say,
For now.
I don't know if this is going to put me in trouble with other people. I think our next mayor is going to be a woman, and I'm just going to leave it there.
Woo! Woo!
I hope that doesn't put me in trouble with my colleagues.
No, listen.
Jamie, the men have had 99 times. It is time for
Yeah.
a woman. When you have
Yeah.
a field of highly qualified women that are being discussed, and I'm always honored to be part of that list, it is time for men to sit down and let these women stand up and talk about where they see the city of Philadelphia moving.
Put the camera on me. So I think it was Catherine Gilmore, Member Gilmore, said and pronounced this was the year of the woman, right? And so much so, we changed the name of council men to council members. So y'all put your thing down, and we applaud you. I am an enlightened male, right? I've claimed that before. It was sexy. You know what I mean? and I appreciate the contribution and the intensity in which you guys are taking on the issue. So lead, follow, or get out of the way. All right, Maria, now you tried to duck it. Answer the question.
Again, I think that there are some highly qualified women. And, if I were to be in a situation where I make that decision and I resign, because ultimately everybody has to resign, you're not in the game until you're in the game, then that is a discussion and a panel and a debate that I look forward to.
So Jamie, that was a veteran move. She ain't mentioned nobody else but herself. That's what vets do. That's what vets do. All right, we're gonna move on.
I'm sharpening my media elbows. I will tell you, and Che, you know this. I am the workhorse, not the show horse. But I know that in this game, I got to sharpen my media elbows. So I'm working on it.
All right, we're going to end with this question. If you had a magic bullet and you're going to pass one impactful piece of legislation in 2021, just one, what would it be and why? I'm going to start with you, Jamie.
Well, I hope we have the same answer because we're working on it together. But I want to do mandatory inclusionary zoning that says that developers have to include actual affordable units in what it is that they're constructing within our neighborhoods. And in legislation that Councilmember Quinones Sanchez already worked on with the housing bonus.
It's an excellent aspiration. How about you, Maria?
No, I look forward to working with Councilmember Gautier on that, because I think if we're going to create diverse mixed income neighborhoods all over the city, it requires all hands on deck, and I think that's one of the tools. If I had to pick one, it would be zero-based budgeting, because I believe that there is a lot of waste in government, and I think that the new normal requires for us to justify to people the kind of investments we want to make. Zero-based budgeting would be the most effective tool to get people to really come forward and be transparent about how we're utilizing their money.
So I'm going to answer the question as well. My wish and aspiration is to pass the Citizens Police Oversight Commission and make it effective and restore the confidence in citizens that when they make a complaint, that it will be fairly heard. And that's my wish for 2021. I want to thank you guys for coming on my podcast. Y'all my besties. I tell Jamie, I said, don't you tell your colleagues you my favorite freshman. Don't I say that?
I appreciate that.
Yeah. And you my
y'all are both my favorite senior council people.
Seniors as in old or all right.
Seniored as in seasoned.
Yeah, there you go. I feel better now. Thank you both for being on Off the Record, where we talk about nothing, but we wind up talking about everything. All this and more on Off the Record.
Thank you, Che.